Hello and welcome. I'm Carolyn Grimminger with the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Our program's mission is to nourish the mind and spirit and serve social justice. Our forums occur on most Sundays at noon and are free and open to the public. We encourage you to attend. Our church is physically located at 4700 Grover Avenue. For more information about our Public Affairs Forum, you can go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. We have a panel discussion today, and I want to introduce our speakers. The topic is Austin a welcoming city? Priscilla Hale is the executive director of ALGO, an organization that works to create and sustain queer people of color, activists, groups, organizations, and allies through artistic expression, wellness promotion, and grassroots organizing. Hale has experience in HIV/AIDS case management, community organizing, production of cultural work, nonprofit administration, and program development and implementation. An East Austin native, her family has been in the Austin area for 7 generations. She has served on the Women's Rising Project's advisory board since 1998. Welcome, Ms. Hale. Paula X. Rojas is a community organizer, licensed midwife, and social justice trainer. For over 20 years, she has worked on issues of gender violence, racial justice, women's reproductive health, child care access, healthcare access, and police brutality. Rojas was a national trainer for Insight, Women of Color Against Violence, and co-founded a number of community-based organizations, including Mamas of Color Rising, Refugio Center for Community Organizing, and the New York Organizing Support Center. Born in Chile during the dictatorship, Rojas grew up in Houston and later worked as an organizer in Chile, Brooklyn, New York City, and now with Mama Sana, Vibrant Women in Austin since 2008. Alejandro Casares works with ICE out of Austin, organizing immigrant communities to improve their daily lives by building collective power to challenge deportation policies. A native of Honduras, his mother traveled to the United States when he was 2 years old and returned to bring Casares and his sisters to the country 4 years later. Since 2010, Casares' focus has been on immigrant communities in Arizona and Austin. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm Paula Rojas, and I am going to start by just walking us through a little bit of information about Austin. Thank you for inviting us, and thank you for the topic that you put out. Is Austin a welcoming city or not? I think it's really important that we be asking these hard questions and not just looking on what we see on the surface. So I think we're all here for the same reason. We want to reflect more deeply about what's going on. And we thought that before we shared our experiences, we gathered some data about Austin that most people don't usually know about. So, I think you all might know that Austin has been named formally as the best place to live in the country, a great place to move to. Have you all heard about this? In all kinds of publications nationally. Every year, for the last maybe 6 to 8 years, there's at least 10 different places where Austin gets named as the healthiest city, the most family-friendly, the best place to live, the best place to buy a house, the best place to raise children, on and on and on. But what we've found in our experiences is that there seems to be 2 different realities or multiple realities functioning in the same city, and that on the surface things look so healthy, happy. When you see public spaces, which is part of the issues, it's a predominantly white, upper middle class, very healthy, fit community on the surface, right? And in reality, what's happening in many communities around the city is very, very different, and we don't get to see that in public spaces, or that isn't what's shown as and promoted as Austin. So we gathered some information. Our organizations have been working together for years informally to support each other's campaigns and communities, and then a few years ago we decided to actually start working together more formally to address these issues in a more systemic way. And what we found is that Austin is actually quite inequitable on many fronts, and we started to look at different measures of how that inequality works. So one we looked at was income. I don't know if you know this, but income levels in Austin vary widely, and therefore there's very disparate impacts of poverty. Black residents make 58%, and Latino residents make 56% of what white residents make currently in Austin. Poverty rates disproportionately affect African Americans and Latinos compared to whites. Unemployment issues in Austin, we have a relatively low unemployment rate, but in 2012, the average unemployment rate overall was 6.4%, though for blacks it's 12.1%, and for Latinos 8.4%, while for whites 5.7%. Housing, everybody knows housing has gotten more complicated even in the last few years. The data that we have is already 3 years old, but in 2013, 48% of Austin residents were spending more than 30% of their income on housing, which is, you all know that that is not sustainable when people are spending so much of their whole family income on housing. That's almost half the city. Approximately 32% of the city's homeless population is chronically homeless, and the black community is hugely overrepresented amongst the homeless population in Austin. Food access, you've all heard about the concepts, food deserts, et cetera. Have you heard about this? So we have, again, here's one of the most intense issues. Austin, more than any other city in the country, Austin, the home of Whole Foods and all this, health food craze, is also a place where 38% of the people are food insecure in our community. And that is disproportionately Black and Latino communities. So 25% of Black households and 23% of Latino households are food insecure, while 11% of white households are food insecure. And this is geographically based. So there's 5 zip codes right now in Austin that do not have a full service grocery store. I don't know if you were aware of that. Transportation challenges disproportionately affect the elderly, the disabled, and the poor. You might imagine that to be the case, and it's impacting people's ability to get to work, to the grocery store, to doctor's offices, etc. We don't have a good public transportation infrastructure, you know that, and who is most affected is disparate. Education. You all know that we have some really good public schools in Austin. People move here for those public schools. I don't know if you're aware of that. While at the same time, we have both issues in school readiness, which means children who get access to preschool are at a huge advantage when it's time to go to real school, right? And preschool is not universal. It's something you pay for. It's very, very expensive in Austin. People are struggling on waiting lists for years and years and years to get into preschool, while other kids have had, years of really great preschool education. So once kids start in pre-K or kindergarten, there's already a huge divide between how much preparation they have, and then in high school graduation rates, you can read here, there's a big difference between white communities and Black and Latino communities. Here's another issue, police brutality. I've worked on this issue for about 20 years since I was a young person, and it's been an issue forever in this country. It's not that now there's more police brutality than there was 20 years ago. It's that now we have cameras and cell phones to prove what's been happening. The issue here is that we tend to look at it as a problem that other cities are having and not realize that we have that same problem right here in Austin. And that studies have shown then that when the police stops people in Austin, Black folks are 3 times as likely as white folks to be searched, and Latinos are more than twice as likely than white folks to be searched, despite the fact that people of color are not more likely to be carrying contraband. So, and this isn't even talking about who gets stopped, right? We know there's already disproportionality in who gets targeted to be stopped. Once you are stopped, who gets searched and who doesn't get searched is a huge difference. And then black folks are 3.4 times more likely than whites and more likely than Latinos to be booked into jails. That is another reality that despite all the critique of APD, despite supposed training that they're going through, has not been improving. So some of us work on things related to health, mental health, wellness. Algo and I work around maternal and infant health. I don't know if you know this, but at least now 1 in 10 children is uninsured here, and 1 in 4 adults is uninsured in Travis County. So the rates, it's 32% here, but now it's 36% of Latinos are uninsured, and that number is only going to increase considering the new policies we're living under. The black community has higher rates of being uninsured, though that isn't the whole picture. It's not just about having access to care, but it's having access to care that is respectful, dignified, relevant, culturally relevant, and that is sorely lacking in our community. I don't know if you've heard about this, but even the Public Health Department of Austin has maps that show the rates of mortality due to cancer, heart disease, and other chronic diseases are very much different based on race in our county. And as you know, diabetes is one example that black and Latino folks are disproportionately suffering death due to diabetes at twice the rate of the white community. And we could go on with other examples. We just picked out a few. So that's kind of the context that we thought we wanted to start with. We know you might already know this information or maybe not, but for us it's important to start with recognizing what's happening in terms of the social and economic conditions in our local community and how different communities are affected. So I want to pass the mic to my co-panelists to talk a little bit more about what does this really mean. You know, numbers and statistics don't tell you the whole picture. What does this really mean? What's really happening on the ground right now to our communities? Then what are we doing about it?
My name is Alejandro, right, and I do a lot of work around immigration. And I think that one of the hardest things that we've had to do, right, is to convince people that we are not living and have never lived in a sanctuary city. I think that that's been a myth that the city of Austin has told itself over and over and over again. I mean, as Paula was saying, right, I think that folks are able to look at other places as Maricopa County, to look at like southern states and say, oh, these places are terrible. Like, isn't it great that like immigrants live here instead of like living in Arizona or living in Georgia and Alabama? When in reality, since 2009, the city of Austin has helped deport over 3,000 people. And at its height, it had the highest deportation rates in all of the United States. So that means that of the folks who got booked into the jail, the folks who got deported, we had the higher rates in Maricopa County, had higher rates in Williamson County, higher rates in any small little conservative county you can think of in Texas. We had a higher deportation rate than them. And since the program was ended in 2014, we were top 5 every single year. So it's been a sort of, as Paula was saying, right, a sort of like breaking through this idea that we have of who we are, of just saying, I mean, I believe the city of Austin during that time was named like immigrant-friendly town, immigrant-friendly city, right? And like even today we continue to push this idea that we are at the forefront of the resistance to Trump's policies, when in reality we're not. And right, the folks who we had some of the highest rates of people getting picked up in the U.S. during the raids, and had the highest rates of people picked up with no criminal conviction. And through anecdotes and stories, people told us that it was APD who was knocking on their door, not Immigration and Customs Enforcement, but the police department. And folks are good at saying, well, they were wearing a blue uniform and it said Austin Police. That is in no way confusing for someone that, right, that's not a nice officer. So I think that for us, that's been sort of the struggle of like pretending to break this idea that, A, we are a sanctuary city, that we've ever been a sanctuary city, or that our local politicians are somehow leading the way on our resistance against deportations, because the matter of fact is that they're not, and folks are still getting deported from the city. And even though the raids have stopped, people are still calling us and telling us like, hey, immigration is at my neighbor's door. I mean, just a week ago, we heard that immigration went to an apartment building, asked the manager if they could shut down the entrance and the exit gate so that they could question people in those apartments. When the manager told them no, immigration just set up outside of the gates and waited to question people. And they did that for about 2 hours. So yes, I think that we continue to push this idea of, like, but immigrants do great here, and we're like a city of immigrants, and our politicians continue to say that they value it, which I don't doubt that they value the immigrant community, right? But at the end of the day, I think that the city of Austin is overwhelmed with how the retaliation from the Trump administration is using the immigrant communities as pawns to punish our politicians. And we're still continuing to, right, it is because of the work of undocumented immigrants that we have a policy in the sheriff's department that says that they will not cooperate, except with like 3 exceptions, right? It was some of the folks in here who like pushed that idea and pushed that policy and opened up the space for Sally Hernandez to come in and campaign on that promise of ending the cooperation with Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
All right, so I'm Priscilla Hale. I'm the director of ALGO, which is a queer LGBTQ people of color organization in Austin. And we've been doing work for almost 32 years here and across the state and across the country. And so our 3 focus, like you said, are cultural arts, health and wellness, and social justice programming. And, you know, there's been so much happening lately that I was like, oh, I just want to have a conversation, right? Because I think, you know, just this week in the on Facebook with all of a new article came out in the Austin American blog about Austin being, you know, the best city to live in again. And so that article was circulating in my Facebook, my personal one, but also the work one. And then the article being about, well, but it's the only city that's losing its black population, right? And so I think the city is very embarrassed by that, as well as they should be, because what does that mean? You know, as a black person living here, what does that mean that a city is the best when we are leaving? Then we can't be here. It's the best when you all aren't here. Not you all, but us aren't here. I'm thinking about the article, like I'm reading the article. And so then there was another article about, you know, how black folks are dealing with the whiteness in this city, right? And y'all know what that means. We're not talking about you as a white person. It's like the whiteness of the city and the erasure of this historical black folks being in this town in particular. And, you know, I work for a people of color organization, but I moved through this city as a black person, as well as my family has, you know, as business owners. My parents live in the same house that they bought before I was born in the early 60s. I grew up in an all-black neighborhood. People were very afraid to come into our neighborhood. You know, we lived in East Austin before it was cool for people to live in East Austin, because it was cool then, right? But now people are like, oh, it's cool, it's hip. And so I think, you know, when you add on that to queer and LGBTQ folks, there's an additional layer of the marginalization that happens. So even all the topics that we talked about, like immigration, like thinking about what does it mean then to be an LGBTQ immigrant, right? Like what has happened was we did work together. We were on Immigrant Rights Coalition, yes, gave them money, but decided they would not actually give the group the money because they were associated, because we were on the coalition that Algo was one of the founding coalition members and was on there, and they said, we will give this group money, but you all have to take Algo off of there, because we will not support anything that's LGBTQ. So the good thing about that group is they said, you know what, there are LGBTQ immigrants, we're going to turn these funds down, right? That is huge, to actually have funding be given, but have these stipulations about who it is can actually access those funds. And so, you know, we showed up as the organization and was like, well, we're not going to tell the coalition what to do. This is where we're going to see, is this coalition really about, because you never know when you're on a coalition where people's values really are until you're pushed to make some decision around, I think it was $20,000, right? $20,000 is a lot of money for the work that we do. It's not a lot of money for a lot of people, but we can do some stuff with $20,000. People just have no idea, right? And so when they turned that down, it was just one of those moments where it was clear that our struggle and our work is so great and vast. And so it was great to be a part of that coalition. Then they, you know, brought in some folks who were not so moving forward and, you know, in that ideology. And so Algo's was no longer on the coalition. I don't really know what's even happening with that group anymore. But that was fine. But now we know where they stood. But that just meant that there was the lack of value around LGBTQ immigrants, which we know there are LGBTQ immigrants, right? And so it's just it's that. So when you add on that piece, the work and the struggle even gets harder for folks. And this city has been recognized as one of the most LGBTQ friendly places to move, to be. But that's not the case for people of color, right? Again, it's all these things around, yes, it's this for some people, but not for others, which I think the statistics give the back to what the city absolutely knows. And so even if you're not listening to our lived experiences and what we are saying as folks, when you look at the statistics, that picture alone ought to be enough for this city to do some major work around making change happen to ensure that this city is a space and a place for everybody, and particularly for people who have been here historically, right? So it's not enough to make the city just great for people who are coming in and moving from other places. What does it mean to not value the historical lives and places that people of color have had in this community? Luckily, I grew up in a very poor neighborhood. I was not one of the poor families. My father was in the military. He retired from the military because it was easy. And he just told me that story about how he just decided to stay in the military because where was he going to make that kind of money as a black man and be able to just kind of have a little job that was leisurely, right? But it afforded us as a family to have access to health care, to have access to food, you know, because you can go out to the base and get cheap food, you get your medicines for free and that kind of thing. But the people around me didn't have that. So not only did I come from a family of not having that, but the neighborhood didn't have that. And so the neighborhood is quickly changing. And I'm a little shocked and taken aback by some of the things that are happening in this city of where we don't even have spaces to be. And so the fact that like Algo can exist after 32 years, I mean, we went from having a very large space to being a very small space. But we make our space available to other groups because we are actually one of the only groups that has a space. Even in this coalition, there are multiple groups in the coalition, but we're one of the few that has a space. And so in our small little living room, we hold those meetings, right? And we pack in there. But that's what you do when you're trying to do the resources. And we're one of the least resourced folks, but we have learned how to do that and how to ensure that what we do have reaches our communities. And so yeah, when I think of, you know, LGBTQ folks in terms of being able to get jobs here, you know, Texas is an at-will state. So all you need to do is, you know, you wore the blue shirt, but it's really because you're gay. They can just get rid of you, right? Trans folks who don't have IDs or identification that match their presentation makes them unemployable, makes them unable to even get jobs. You know, are just not even having an ID, period. The whole thing, you know, just people just not being able to have access to basic things to get employment. And then the housing, our folks are living together trying to make housing work. Austin has a lot of housing that's supposed to be affordable, but what we've been told by our communities is that, yes, those places are affordable housing, but they're still requiring some of those folks to have 3 times a month amount of income. Some of those folks are living on disability. How in the world are you going to have 3 times a month of income if you're living on a fixed income? And so we were going to fight around ensuring that, okay, if Austin keeps building all of these spaces, let's make them ensure that they have affordable slots and more affordable slots. But what we were told by our communities is actually they're making us show the 3 times income. So if you all do that, we still won't be in there. And so, but that's information, right? If we weren't in the streets and working with communities, we wouldn't know that, because some of us are not living. We do have folks who are living in affordable housing, but some of us are not. And here we are trying to make plans and, fight for justice around a particular issue. When we bring the people, they're like, oh no, that actually is going to harm us, because do you know they're doing this? We were not aware of that. I took that back to the group and said, actually, we don't want to do that because this is what I've heard. And this is what, the lived experiences. And so I think in addition to much data that we get, that folks really need to rely on lived experiences of folks is just as important as these data numbers, because the data is skewed. The data gets skewed, and the lived experiences are worse than the data. And so if you can imagine that the data that's being presented that's impacting our communities is worse, then that tells us why we have to, why the struggle is there to ensure that we're moving in this social justice way. So I got a lot to say, but I'm going to stop now.
And I guess to kind of build on that, and then we want to maybe, if there's time, open it up. A few things is, one, demographically, since 2010, I don't know, even the city demographer admitted that Austin's a majority people of color city. They call it now a majority minority city since 2010 officially, but like Priscilla's saying, actually it's much more than that, because not everyone's even counted in the census. But if even the census since 2010 is recognizing it, that means we are for sure a majority people of color city. But it doesn't feel that way in a way, right? It is true that we are a city mostly made up of people of color, but because institutions and public spaces are in the hands of the white community, like Priscilla's talking about, you can drive around and be in Austin and feel like you're in a white city, right? And so that's part of the disconnect and the harm, to be in a majority people of color city but not have enough institutions and public cultural spaces left to be able to assert and build community in the way that we should be able to do. So that I would say I can add a little bit as a midwife in the organization that I'm a part of. What we're seeing happening every single day is a totally different experience if you're pregnant, upper middle class white person, than if you're a pregnant, poor working class woman or person of color. We also are supporting gender non-conforming people of color who are pregnant, which is, like Priscilla's talking about, a whole other array of challenges in terms of dealing with a medical system. But even those who are gender conforming, because of the way the Medicaid system works, the CHIP perinatal, the MAP system works, if you're pregnant, you don't have access to the same choices, options, care than someone else. And there's a level of scrutiny and kind of policing that's happening to people because you're poor that is very different than someone who can privately pay. So there's the women that I care for are being drug tested without their consent. CPS, which is Child Protective Services, is called to be ready at the delivery to take the baby away based on, speculations and accusations that we spend a lot of our time actually fighting the system and holding space so that people can keep their babies. That's not to mention that, I don't know if you know, but if you have a vaginal birth, Medicaid reimburses $500, but if you have a cesarean, Medicaid will reimburse $5,000, so 10 times more. So there's a profit incentive in the healthcare system. When you see a woman, a low-income woman of color coming in on Medicaid, do you want to be there with her for 20 hours while she naturally labors and the hospital gets $500? Or do you want a 20-minute surgery, get her quick in and quick out, and you get to cash in at least $5,000? And that's why women of color have higher rates of cesarean, unnecessary. These are major abdominal surgeries that take a long time to recover for unnecessarily. It has to do with the profit motive, and it has to do with just not respecting people's dignity and assuming that they're not going to fight back in a way that, though the medical system does also push upper middle class white people in the same direction to over medicalize more surgeries than are necessary, because they also will make a lot more money. They do make a decent amount of money with vaginal births for people with private insurance, so there isn't the same level of profit motive, right? So that's one of the things we see, as well as people having babies and getting deportation orders the next day, people having babies and during the birth, because I do home births, we have eviction notices coming at the door while working in the middle of the birth. We have people getting their electricity cut off right after they come home from the hospital with their new baby, and they don't have hot water, they don't have electricity, and those are the challenges. They're actually not so many health challenges, but it's more the social challenges that affect people's ability to care for themselves and their babies. And we see this every single day on a pretty large scale here in Austin happening. So these are kind of like the underbelly of what's going on, that on the surface. Did you know that Austin's a place that has the most midwives and doulas and prenatal massage, Mayan abdominal massage, all these kinds of alternative awesome treatments during pregnancy, better than almost any other city in the country. We have more midwives per capita than New York City. We have more midwives, not per capita, but period, than New York City. So that is an incredible divide that I still can't wrap my head around. So I think that is maybe the kind of the most insidious part of Austin, is that on the surface it looks so pretty, and it's hard to get people to be willing to look more deeply at what's really going on and want to challenge the system, because it's quite comfortable to live here for many, and it's a liberal, progressive place so that people enjoy that level of relative freedom for their own communities, right? So one thing that I think, to say some positive things, we have been working together with a number of other grassroots organizations of and by people of color, informally and now formally for the last 2 years, with a coalition that's called Communities of Color United for Racial Justice. And we have a number of different campaigns that we've been working on, and one, just building solidarity amongst us more intentionally. Even within communities of colors, there's so much difference. So the Asian community, I don't know if you're aware, has all the data is aggregated, and so the averages come out really great in health and income, et cetera. But actually, there are very, very poor Southeast Asian refugee and other communities here in Austin, immigrant communities, who are facing very similar challenges to Latino and Black communities. But then there's some very high income Asians, South Asians in particular, that create an average that looks really good. So we don't even think about what's happening to those communities, much less think about kind of cultural and language access issues that they're having. So that's part of what we're trying to figure out, is see what is the whole picture of what communities of color are facing in Austin, build some solidarity across our groups with each other, support each other, learn from each other, and push our city to make systemic change. So one of the things we're working on is we push the city hardcore to create an equity assessment tool for the city of Austin to be used in this year's budget cycle to look at how money is being dispersed by the city. And we have been constantly needing to push this along. We passed a resolution, but it doesn't mean anything to have it on the books, but to put it into practice means to keep pushing. So that's something that you all might be interested in getting involved in. We need to hold our city accountable. The city has tons of money, unlike other cities. The general budget, general fund annual budget is like $900 million. And 700 million of that goes to policing and public safety. And just to get a sense, 70 million goes to health and human services, while 700 million goes to policing and public safety. That's how inequitable our budget is, and how it's keeping things the way that they are, as opposed to turning it around. There's plenty of public money to create real affordable housing, real great health care for all families, deal with food and transportation access issues. There's not a lack of resources. There is more than enough to go around to solve all these problems. It's how that money is being divided. So we're going to push this year at the budget, right? And we need more people to come out to push city council and the mayor to hold itself to this equity tool when looking at how to divide up money in the annual budget, as well as incentives for developers coming in. You know, they give millions to the Domain or others to come and build fancy malls or bring their businesses, when that money could be going to actually creating jobs for working class folks or housing for people who need it. So that's what the equity tool is all about. Just to think that it is not so, it's bleak, but we're doing a lot about it and need more people to jump in.
Okay, we have about 20 minutes for question and answer. I will bring you the microphone.
I'm Ellen Grady Sessa, and thank you so much for being here. I'm a member of St. Ignatius Parish, and then on the board of directors of Annunciation House down at the border of El Paso and Juarez. I have two questions. What is our percentage of refugees here in Austin that we accept compared to other cities, if you have any information on that? And then if you can say the names of, so I can associate some of the names of the neighborhoods that have the food deserts and things. Thank you.
So I don't think we have any exact number of refugees, because one of the things right now is there's nobody working particularly with black refugees. And so there's a group out of California that actually is doing a lot of work around LGBTQ work, and they ask me, who's working with black refugees? And I did this search and I found an article on this woman who said, I'm in the community and this is what I do for black refugees, right? But it was not an organization and not a group getting funded. She's just like, I've just been working with folks from all over. So I don't think any of us, I mean, I think there's some refugee numbers that you can get from organizations that are doing particular refugee work. But I think, again, it's that thing of there's a whole group of people missing from that count because of additional marginalization that keeps them from being in some of these refugee spaces or in any of the other spaces.
I mean, and I can add to that. I don't know the numbers either, but I know in public housing, because we do door knocking a lot in public housing, I've met recently many families, Iraqi families, families from Cameroon, families from Burundi, families from a number of different countries that we didn't even know were here. They're coming to our organization for prenatal care. So we're actually now starting to care for refugee families who don't speak English or Spanish, and who are part of pockets in different parts of the city. I know that there's different public schools that have like a group of maybe 30 families from Laotian families in one public school over here, and they're together because they're all living in shelters together. So I see that there's many pockets around the city, and yeah, we don't have specific numbers, but I'm sure you could easily look it up. I think that part of the challenges for us is we've worked so hard to create kind of bilingual, bicultural spaces, but what we need is much more than that now, and I don't know that anybody has that kind of capacity to address it yet, right?
Yeah.
I think what about for undocumented?
I was just going to say that according to our website, the City of Austin's website, the City of Austin has 12,000 refugees. That's according to their data.
Well, definitely Dove Springs, but what's being called the Eastern Crescent is now kind of from 183 East.
So it's the
out.
78724 then.
Right, out north and east is where so many communities are having to move to, right? Colony Park doesn't have a grocery store. They're negotiating a possibility of one. And the migration is happening so quickly because of gentrification that the planning can't even keep up with it. And then I know from the Office of Sustainability of the City of Austin, they do have some good people who are thinking deeply about this. What they're finding is that when you bring a full-service grocery store into a food desert, gentrification accelerates, and so it actually, each time they try to do it, then it pushes those people out even further, and so that is what's been happening in the last maybe 5 to 7 years. So it's almost like a paradoxical situation where even well-intentioned public health folks don't know how to solve the problem.
And I just want to add that the food, not having the grocery store is not only the issue. I live in 78723. There's a grocery store less than 5 minutes from my house. I cannot go to that grocery store and buy fresh vegetables because there are none, right? And how they go, that, they get to go pick out the groceries at the space based on their profit of the stores, which means this store gets to go last to pick out fresh fruits and vegetables, which means they get the last of it. So there's not a lot of organic stuff in there. I'm a vegetarian, and so I actually go to Mueller to shop. If I need something that's in a can, then I can go over there. But I live in a food desert because I have to drive to Mueller instead of 3 minutes up the block from my house, right? So I think that's where I'm saying the lived experience on top of the data about a food desert. I'm like, if I can't go up the street and buy fresh fruit, I would never buy anything out of that store. My partner went there and bought something. I said, don't do that ever again. Look at this. I was like, look, it's rotten in the bag and you just came home. But she didn't pay attention to that. But so I just wanted to put that there.
And the same chain of supermarkets, if you go to a different one in a different neighborhood, is totally different what they have, right? Yeah.
And prices, right?
What's going to be done to combat Connections 2025, which is planning on deleting bus stops throughout the city of Austin? We have a lot of people with disabilities in the city who cannot drive, who rely on public transportation. We have the Texas School for Blind and Visually Impaired, and we also have the Rosedale School right here, 2 institutions right in this neighborhood. And public transportation is not just about saving up for a car.
Right.
The CEO of Capital Metro does not use public transportation herself, and they are on a warpath against people who do have to rely on public transportation. We were just talking about housing and going to a grocery store. Guess what? You can't do either if you do not have mobility. You're stuck.
So I think when we're looking at the inequities, we're looking at all of those things, right? Like, we may not talk about that, but we talk about many of our folks are on public transportation. But we also talk about the whole thing around the neighborhoods being changed by folks focusing on the bike lanes. And the conversation I just had was, some people cannot ride bikes. We have people with disabilities in this town. How are you going to be like, well, we just want to ride bikes. The city needs to be riding bikes because it's healthier. Well, everyone cannot ride a bike, okay? And so you have to think about, it just has to include everyone, which I think is the issue around Austin being the welcoming city. It's like it leaves out the folks who are most impacted by these things without thinking about that. It's like, well, yes, we all want parks and we all want this, but can folks access that? Which is, I think, the thing around, the definition of access always has to look at be very deep. Like, access is not like, it's available, why don't you go, which is what they tell many of us. Well, it's there, you have it, why don't you? And it's like, no, it's not, because it's still not accessible, even though I have access, right? And so I think our work includes that. We have always had a point around transportation in the work that we've done, around ensuring that folks can move around this city and get to places. But the city is so vast and so changing so much that that's why we're like, okay, we need more people on board to be like, and knowing these things, because they're not talking about all of those things. Like, a lot of people don't know that, right? But when you know that, then you can do something about it. So I think having these conversations and bringing things to light is absolutely critical for folks who are doing social justice, who can say, wait a minute, yeah, that looked great, but it's actually going to bring some harm to some folks, right? You know?
I wanted to say right there, like, so I lived in Decker Lane, like on like Park Colony, like Loop area, when I was a kid, and I remember working in high school with a group of parents who wanted to get a sidewalk, because for the longest time, their kids had to walk like on Decker Lane, like on the side of the road to get to school, and I remember a few months ago riding my bike, because there's like a bike trail there, and that is the sidewalk. Like, sidewalks didn't move in until there was a bike lane there. And the parents still, like, they're like, oh, we built these sidewalks, but like, these sidewalks are actually bike lanes, and they only go one way. They don't actually go to the schools, which kids are still having to walk from their houses on like either a field or like on the road to school. But now we have these sidewalks. It's like, no, this is a bike lane that only goes like two ways. So, which is part of the reason why we're like, folks in that area like don't have access to like food, and because there's one bus that goes there, I think it's like, or it used to be the 37. I'm not sure if that's still bus, but right, there is no folks that live there like literally live in a different town, and yeah, I just wanted to agree with that. There is no public transportation in this city.
And this year, it's possible that we could get the Department of Transportation's budget to be scrutinized by the equity tool. It's possible, and it would be great to have people like you participate in pushing for that, because that is one of the departments that needs to be looked at in terms of equity. And that is a possibility, but we need more people to push for it. So thank you for bringing that up.
My question is really just where your statistics came from, and if those numbers are like publicly available, or yeah.
So we wrote a report.
They're here with us.
This is what it looks like, and we have other reports coming out. So the first one is Austin, a family-friendly city: perspectives and solutions from mothers in the city. And all the data that we showed is from this report, and we wrote it. It was a community written report. We took a lot of data from City of Austin, from the Community Action Network, from the Department of Health and Human Services. So it's formal data that we looked up. But we can give you the link. This is a paper one. We only have one, but there's a link online that we can give you on the report, and at the end it has citations of where each data point came from. The Community Action Network is an entity, a public entity that actually has a dashboard. It's known as CAN, C-A-N, that has an annual dashboard of what's happening locally. And they have gotten much better recently, and in their annual dashboard they have an equity section, and it's actually pretty good. And they're trying to show, is Austin moving the needle on all these issues, including police brutality and police profiling, and they're making links to the fact that Austin has a very low crime rate and a very high number of police, So every year that gets updated, because this is already a couple years old, so I would go maybe to that for the most recent.
Yes, my name's Luther Elmore, and thank you for being with us today. However, you filled me with despair. That is to say, with the issues that you've addressed, you did not even talk much about the issue of transportation and roads, but with Capital Metro cutting underused lines and cutting those routes out, with the allocation of the city budget, with ICE and APD raids, and with the increasing income inequality in the city of Austin, and with us having a declining African American population, where do we start?
So you can be invited to the Equity Tool meetings, the Equity Tool meeting. Did I say beatings? I didn't say beatings. It feels like beatings with all the meetings that we have to attend. But I think that is a place because they are asking for community input around that, for people to attend that. But also when we're trying to push so that the tool gets ready quickly because it's coming through the equity office that was just created this year. And the more that there's some key things coming out that are going to have some huge impact that we want, like there's Code Next that's coming out. We want to ask, can that be run through the equity tool before it gets implemented? Because that is huge around housing and displacement of communities, and yes, and so when we are organizing and telling people, come down, give your thoughts about how this will impact some of the most marginalized folks. You know, we do a great job of organizing people, but it's so much greater if we can have other folks who are speaking, like the more, because that's when the city pays attention, when they are like, oh, these are our constituents, and people who are from different city council spaces, I'm sorry. Districts, yes. Then those folks, you can tell them, I live in this district and this is the impact, and I voted for you or not voted for you, whatever, but I want my voice to be heard. And that, the more people we can get moving and pushing on that and pushing from different sides, the more it can change, because they look at us and go, oh, here they come again. It's the same people, although we bring other people, but it's like, and oftentimes we're not even the ones speaking. We're getting folks who are most directly impacted by that, but we need folks also to be like, no, this is not okay. I'm from here, or I moved here, and I agree, and this should not happen, but we don't see that. We don't see that happening, and that's why I'm saying, but part of it is we know a lot of people are just not aware of some of the impacts, that it looks great, because, if you're trying to sell the car, you're going to tell me most of the things great about the car. You're not going to tell me, but it got 65 miles an hour per gallon on the gas, right? When that would be key, right? And so I think the city, paints pretty things, right? Because that's what you do when you're trying to sell stuff, to get folks to engage in that. So I think there are multiple areas in which we talked about, and you could say, you know what, this is what I'm passionate about, and this is where I wanna jump in on this particular area. So.
Yeah, and I guess I would just say that I think we're in a really complicated political, historical moment where it's even easy for it to get more messed up in Austin, because with what's happening nationally, then Austin, like Alejandro talked about, sees itself as like this progressive haven for immigrants, etc. And it creates a false reality where we don't actually up the ante the way we should be. Because what's happening nationally isn't impacting us locally, and what's happening locally is not great either. So, I think we just have to look at her story. Nothing changes unless we really step up our game, and I think this is the time. This is another really important historical moment where I think we have to push, and it isn't just all go to City Hall and act nice and testify for 2 minutes again. I think we need to get to the point where we kind of shut it down, where we have so many people flooding their budget hearings and saying, refusing to be silenced or to just follow the line that only 20 people get to speak or whatever. If we had hundreds and hundreds of people flooding in there and not leaving until this gets resolved, and really not just our folks that many can't vote because of legal status or past incarceration, which is part of how they see us. They're like, oh yeah, they're here, but yeah, they don't really count as much. But like Priscilla's saying, if we're all there in much bigger numbers and willing to stay there till midnight and yell loudly, they're gonna start to listen. And we haven't done that. City Hall is a very polite place where we go and act nice and smile and speak for 2 minutes. And we don't need to do that anymore. The stakes have gotten to the point where we need to really take it up a notch, and everyone needs to be involved. And people who have white privilege they get listened to differently more, and people who are elders of all races also have command a level of respect that is important and useful. So let's use all the ways that people can be listened to and push the envelope now more than ever.
Okay, we have one last question from Peggy Morton.
Well, mine is actually a follow-up because, and I heard you, at least you said go to the budget hearings at the city council. You had mentioned something about go to the equity tool meetings. Are those also from the city council? Because I guess that's my biggest question. Is
They're from the city of Austin.
Okay.
So we can send a link to somebody. I don't know who the contact
Or
person
we can
was.
take that, yeah, we can send you all the links of the different kind of pressure points that we're trying to impact so that you can share with
so that
everyone.
we can join you too and be there as a force, because I like what you're saying and I'm just so sorry to hear all of this. But so that was my main question.
We have a couple of minutes left. If you want to summarize more action items, more points we could do.
Yeah, the only thing I hear the despair. I hear y'all's despair, and I want y'all to know that this is the moment where you've heard things. You're in despair. You're in distress. But think about the reality. Like, a lot of people are trying to get involved in this, and we're like, this, because the current administration, this has been going on. It's just been quiet, right? We have experienced all of these atrocious acts against our communities for years, right? Years. And just like Facebook and social media and all the other places are bringing that to light, this administration is bringing that to light for some people. Our work really has not changed. We sat together and we were like, wow, it's interesting to watch folks say, well, what can we do now? What can we do now? We're like, y'all know, for 20 years we've been doing this and we're exhausted, like, right? We're exhausted. And so if you're in despair from this 1 hour of talking, imagine the 100s of hours and years that our people have been dealing with this, right? And so, yes, the time is now for some folks, but the time has been there. And so it really is, we're like, come on, let's do this, let's make this happen. And we're, obviously, we don't have the privilege to sit in despair. We have to make it happen. We have to make Austin ours. We have to create. We have to do all kinds of things around our resources. CCU is completely unfunded. The coalition is completely unfunded. All of that work, for the most part, is volunteer work, of people just showing up, us writing these resolutions, us going down there. I'm getting paid because I'm on a salary, but that means I'm working 80 hours. But that doesn't mean I'm not getting any more money when I'm doing that. And so I say that just to say that we have the resources, and this city has the resources to make all of these things happen. We just have to make it happen, and you have to be really committed to that. So.
I think we're out of time, so let's give them a hand. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Do you want us to come?